Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar, INMETRO and its role in the Brazilian medical device registration process. My name is Sarah Steck, and I'm the Legal and Regulatory Director here at L&E GMED North America. Brazil has the largest medical device market in Latin America, and has been a key target for many medical device manufacturers throughout the world. Now, while all medical devices must be approved by ANVISA before being marketed in Brazil, electromedical devices must receive an additional certification before their submission to ANVISA, INMETRO Certification. But what is INMETRO? What does it do? And how does a manufacturer receive INMETRO certification? This webinar will go over all of that and more, so stay tuned. Even though this webinar is pre-recorded, we're still here to answer your questions as they arise. Please don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat box or in the Q&A box that you see on your screen, and we'll answer them as they come in. I'm also going to stick around after the webinar for about 10 minutes to keep on answering your questions. If I don't get to your question, don't worry. We will take all the unanswered questions and respond to them in the coming weeks. If you can't wait that long, you can always give us a call or send us an email. We'll have our email address on the last slide. And with that, let's get underway. Let's take a look at what we're going to cover today. First, we'll talk generally about INMETRO, what it is, a little bit of its history, and its role as an accreditation body for Brazil. Then we'll talk about where INMETRO and what it does fits into the Brazilian medical device registration process. We'll also give a very quick overview of how to register a device in Brazil. Although for a more detailed process, I would recommend you take a look at our guide to registering medical devices in Brazil, which is available through our website. So we'll really just focus on INMETRO for this webinar. Finally, we'll go through the process of receiving INMETRO certification for electromedical devices. And with that, let's get started. First, let's take a look at INMETRO, what it is and what it does. INMETRO, or the National Institute of Metrology, Standardization, and Industrial Quality, was created in 1973 by Brazilian law. Its purpose is to support the Brazilian internal market and increase productivity and quality. Its predecessor was the INPM, or the National Institute of Weights and Measurements. However, the INPM's mission was limited to legal metrology and quality control, and didn't involve conformity or standards implementation. To harness the industrialized world's technological advances and effectively protect consumers, INMETRO was created. INMETRO supports the Brazilian internal market by performing its duties and tasks. Mainly, it provides technical support to CONMETRO, the National Council of Metrology, Standardization, and Industrial Quality. Essentially, INMETRO is the executive branch of CONMETRO. INMETRO develops Brazil's legal metrology programs and guidelines and maintains the national measurement standards and their traceability to the internal system of units. As a standards development body, it develops standards for products, processes, services, and personnel. On the international stage, it interfaces with the WTO regarding technical barriers to trade and fosters understanding and Brazil's presence in international metrology and quality activities. In addition to being a standards development body, it is also an accreditation body. CGRE, or the General Coordination for Accreditation of INMETRO, is the accreditation arm for INMETRO. CGRE was designated as the accreditation body for conformity assessment bodies in 2007 and is responsible for accrediting labs, certification bodies, and inspection bodies. Now that we know INMETRO is the Brazilian Metrology and Standardization Agency, where does it fit into the Brazilian medical device registration process? Now on this slide, you'll find a few of the important documents that you should look at regarding registering a medical device in Brazil, generally, not just for electromedical devices. Now not all of them, like I said, are associated specifically with INMETRO, but they are all associated with the regulatory requirements to register a medical device in Brazil, so they're all pretty important. Now everyone here will receive a copy of the slides from today, so you'll receive this list when we send out the slides. But these are a lot of documents, and like I mentioned, these aren't the only documents. So what do they tell us about the regulatory process for registering a medical device in Brazil? Now on this slide, you'll see a very high level of the Brazilian medical device registration process. If you are at all familiar with this process, you'll see that this is an extremely high-level view, but that's okay. To get more information about the details of the process, you can refer to our Brazil guide and webinar on registering a medical device in Brazil. But let's move on to the broad strokes. The first step that a manufacturer should take is to find a Brazil registration holder. The registration holder is the party that interfaces with ANVISA, the Brazilian competent authority, and the registration holder also maintains control over the device's registration and GMP certification if you need it. The registration holder is also the party that submits everything to ANVISA for eventual acceptance or rejection. The second step is to examine the Brazilian medical device regulations to ensure that the manufacturer actually has a medical device, determine its class, and the requirements for the technical documentation. Many manufacturers do this first, before contacting a Brazil registration holder. Some do it after and depend on the Brazil registration holder's instructions. Whichever way is okay, but definitely make sure that you have a Brazil registration holder before sending things to ANVISA, because like I said, it's actually the Brazil registration holder who actually sends it. And don't forget, Brazil's medical device regulations may be different from those of the US or the EU. So you always want to start out by looking at the regulations to make sure that your product actually falls under the scope, because sometimes it doesn't. While you're making up your technical documentation to submit, you should get your INMETRO certification. INMETRO certification is required for electromedical devices that are imported into Brazil, as well as some non-active devices. We'll go into what INMETRO certification entails in the next section. Your INMETRO certificate and the test report will constitute part of your technical submission, so this definitely needs to be done before you submit your technical documentation to ANVISA for approval. Once you have your INMETRO certification, you can continue to build your submission file with the required technical information. But what is that technical information? On this slide, you'll see what is required in the technical submission for ANVISA. You can find these requirements in RDC 185-2001, Annex 3. First, the manufacturer should include their BGMP certificate, or Brazilian Good Manufacturing Practices. For medical devices in Brazil classes 3 and 4, ANVISA needs to perform this audit and issue the certificate, even if the manufacturer isn't physically located in Brazil. The manufacturer should also make the general description of their manufacturing procedure and describe the design, drawings, materials, parts, and functions of the medical device. Now, lots of times, this can make up the manufacturer's design file, or even if you're used to the technical file idea with the EU, this is also probably a large portion of your tech file, or it is a large portion of your tech file, definitely, not probably, but definitely. The manufacturer should also include laboratory tests that were performed to show how the product conforms to the standard and regulatory requirements. Now, this is the section where you would usually find the INMETRO testing and certification results. A bibliography should be included for any references that the manufacturer may use, as well as any sterility, toxicity, and validity information that may pertain to the device. Finally, the technical documentation should include the technical and scientific information that the manufacturer uses to demonstrate that the device complies with the safety and efficacy characteristics. This is the clinical studies or investigations, test results analyses, validations, etc. So now we know the general way to receive ANVISA approval for a medical device. However, one important part of that submission for electromedical devices is the INMETRO certification. Now let's see how that specific process works. On this slide, you'll see a few more important documents regarding the medical devices that need INMETRO certification. Now, like I mentioned before, we'll send out a copy of the slides to everyone here today, so you'll be able to receive this list for your reference. The first of these documents is RDC 32-2007, which mandated that electrical equipment that also falls under the sanitary surveillance regime needs to be certified by INMETRO. Instructive Norm 9-8-2009 gives a list of the technical standards that are required for certifying equipment. And finally, RDC 350-2010 is the law that approved requirements for conformity assessments for electrical equipment. Now let's take a look at one specific document, RDC 27-2011. This document outlines the procedures that are required for certifying electromedical devices and equipment. One of the important points it makes is that it applies ANVISA's technical standards to those electrical health products, devices, and equipment. It also states that an INMETRO accredited product certification body, or OCP, is the party who would review the test report and give their opinion as to the manufacturer's INMETRO certification. The document also covers product registration and when modifications are made to a product. So now that we know some of the important documents, let's get into how a manufacturer would receive INMETRO certification. The conformity evaluation requirements are found in Ordinance 350 of September 6, 2010, or 350-2010, which I already mentioned, and it's broken up into three parts. First, there are the tests, according to IEC 60601-1 and others, on a representative sampling in production. These tests are the manufacturer's test to perform through an ILAC signatory testing lab. Now I should also mention here that 60601-1, the third edition, and all of the other standards that go with it are required in Brazil. Unlike the EU, where 60601-1 is a harmonized standard, the third edition is required in Brazil. The second part is the routine testing that is performed on 100% of production. And finally, the conformity evaluation includes an audit of the manufacturer. So if you choose L&E GMED as your INMETRO accredited certification body, then this audit would probably be done at the same time as your regular CE or ISO audits. So let's get into the process for how a manufacturer would receive INMETRO certification. First, the Product Certification Body, or OCP, performs an initial evaluation and feasibility study to determine whether or not INMETRO certification is feasible for the manufacturer. This involves reviewing some of the technical documentation as well as the testing reports for the device. An important section of the feasibility study is identifying the testing either needed or already performed. Now don't forget, IEC 60601-1, the third edition, is mandatory, unlike in the EU. So the device would need to be tested and probably pass its test for IEC 60601-1, the third edition, in order to make it feasible that they would receive INMETRO certification. If you're thinking about INMETRO certification, but you haven't tested your products to the third edition yet, you may want to look into it. The second step the manufacturer would go through is type testing, according to the technical standards in Chapter 2 of Ordinance 350. Sometimes this step is done first, or in parallel to the feasibility study that the certification body does at the beginning. But this type of testing is done by an INMETRO accredited lab or by an ILAC recognized accreditation body. However, note that the certifying body, the OCP, can only review test reports for devices that haven't changed since their testing, and if the test reports are less than 2 years old. This means that if the device has changed since testing, it will probably need to be retested. And of course, that depends on the nature of the change, if it was significant or not. Regardless, you should really ask the OCP whether or not it would need to be retested. In addition, if testing was performed more than 2 years ago, it would need to be retested in order for the certifying body to accept the test report. Finally, the certification body audits the manufacturer and their quality management system. In the audit, the certification body verifies that the manufacturer's quality management system complies with Annex B of Ordinance 350, that the manufacturer performs 100% routine testing as defined in Annex A of Ordinance 350, the manufacturer's production lines, the technical documentation for the devices, and that the manufacturer will undergo an ANVISA audit, and that they would be able to perform the corrective actions that may result from that ANVISA audit. Don't forget, this audit by the certification body is only for INMETRO certification, which isn't the only audit the manufacturer may need to go through in order to be able to register their device in Brazil. Now, I should mention a quick note about the 100% routine testing portion of the audit. These tests are according to clauses 18, 19, and 20 of IEC 60601-1 and Amendment 1 of 1997. They are tests for equipment operation, earth grounding, leakage current, and dielectric strength. So this may be the routine testing that you do already. If all goes well, the manufacturer can receive their INMETRO certification and continue with their submission to ANVISA for registering their electromedical device in Brazil. Excellent! But as with any certification, not only does the manufacturer need to receive it, they also need to maintain it and keep it. Each year, the certification body will audit the manufacturer for Annexes A, B, and C in Ordinance 350 to ensure that the manufacturer is maintaining their quality system according to the requirements. The certification body will also verify that the manufacturer performs the routine testing, that the products haven't been modified, and that the manufacturer has kept all the technical documentation up to date for the device. Now keep in mind that both ANVISA and INMETRO may audit the manufacturer and pull devices off the market to perform type testing on them as well. However, this is the same with pretty much any competent authority, so this shouldn't come as a surprise to manufacturers. Well, that just about wraps up our webinar on INMETRO. Today we covered the basics on INMETRO, what it does, and how it was created. We also took a look at where INMETRO fits into the overall registration scheme for medical devices in Brazil. And finally, we took a look at the process for how a manufacturer would receive INMETRO certification to build their regulatory submission for Brazil. Now this was a pretty general overview, so if you have any further questions, you can absolutely give us a call or send us an email for your questions. We have INMETRO certified auditors on both sides of the Atlantic that are happy to help with questions that you may have. Now, as usual, and like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to stick around for the next 10 minutes or so to answer the questions that you may have. If I don't get to your question, don't worry. We're going to take all the unanswered questions and get back to you in the next few days. Now, like I mentioned previously, we're going to send out a copy of the slides in the next couple days, and we'll post the video on our YouTube channel in the next couple days as well, in case you want to go back and rewatch a segment, or even come back and rewatch the whole thing. And thank you again for coming to our webinar.